Hello, I'm Neil Rackham. I'd hoped to be with you personally at this year's GSSI conference, but unfortunately a scheduling conflict got in the way. So second best is a video taken here at my cabin in Virginia, and hoping that you have not only a little piece of me in the video, but also you have a successful conference as well. And I look forward to seeing you perhaps next year. What can research teach us from experience of previous recessions about how we should sell in this one? It turns out quite a lot. We haven't had a big worldwide recession since the early 80s. But during that time, I had research teams all over Europe and the United States studying how people sold, and I was able to pick some differences between the winners and the losers in difficult times. It's a paradox that today less than a third of business-to-business salespeople have sold in even the smallest downturn. And yet here we are now in the middle of the worst economic mess in more than 50 years. And people don't know how to behave. As a result of that, they'll almost certainly do the same wrong things that people did in the last recession. And I want to just pick out 3 of these and talk about these mistakes, how some of them are counterintuitive, and what salespeople should be doing to avoid them. The first one is that in hard times, salespeople try to chase after more opportunities. I mean, it makes logical sense. These are hard times. Let's try and open up more doors. Let's see if we can get some increased business coming in by just increasing the opportunities we go after. Well, it turns out that although that's a logical strategy, there are very limited circumstances where it works. If you happen to be selling fairly small transactional business, the sort of traditional one called sale, yes, there is evidence that more activity equals more sales in good times or in bad times. But get into the more complex, long cycle business-to-business sale, and that's no longer true. You see, what happens is this. In the complex sale, the people who won out in the last recession and the people who will win out in this one are those who have focus. They actually go after fewer opportunities in more depth. What that means is, before they pursue a piece of business, they decide whether or not they are likely to win it. They have fairly clear criteria to help them get that focus. There's a rule that I think is a useful one, and the rule is, if you wouldn't chase after this piece of business in good times, never chase after it in bad. My good friend Phil Kotler is very fond of what he says is a genuine Chinese proverb, which is, if you chase 2 monkeys, both will escape. And half selling to twice as many opportunities doesn't seem to be a particularly good recipe for success, good times or bad. The unfortunate thing is, in bad times, when people feel under pressure, they will try to go after marginal business because they're scared. Well, let's look at what the winners do. The winners are the ones who focus very, very clearly on fewer opportunities, but over-resource them, put more into them, and they win. Because in selling, there's no prize for coming in second. It's a bad strategy. Yet I can guarantee that as you sit here listening to me, all around Europe, there are salespeople who are putting their effort into marginal business which are very unlikely to win, and they're doing it at the expense of depth and focus on their best opportunities. So watch out for that. almost all sales forces try to increase activity in hard times. It's a bad strategy. Now, let's turn to the second thing where people have trouble. One of the things which comes out of research, again, in good times or in bad, is that the most successful salespeople negotiate very late in the sales process. Now, I should perhaps make a distinction here between selling and negotiating. The two are quite different. When you sell, you try to obtain some sort of an agreement by your interaction and persuasion alone. When you negotiate, you vary the terms to get an agreement. You give something away. If you do that too soon in the sales process, you create an appetite for more concessions, you appear fearful and nervous, you come across to the customer as pushy, and it generally fails. So the rule is negotiate late. And yet, studies in the recession in the 80s show that people were more inclined to negotiate early in the selling cycle when times were hard. That's what people will be doing right now. It's a bad strategy. It's a common mistake. Help them with it. Now, my third area is to me perhaps the most important one strategically. And that's to do with the psychology of buying. There's a common supposition that when times are hard, people buy largely on price. Now, the evidence for that is fairly poor. In fact, the evidence overwhelmingly shows that when you examine the decision criteria used by customers when times are hard, safety is more important than price. When people make a large purchasing decision in hard times, they're very nervous about the decision, they're very risk averse, and they'll make a more expensive decision if they perceive it as more safe. Perhaps the best example of this of all is the brilliant strategy of IBM during the 80s, during the last big recession. The IBM marketing value proposition was nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. They were safe. Their equipment was overpriced, underfeatured, but they were safe. During the recession, they had 3 of their most profitable years. They took market share from their competitors. And yet they were by far the most expensive in the marketplace, and by most rational measures of value, they wouldn't stand up. But you see, in good times, people will take a risk. In hard times, they're extraordinarily nervous. And so, you never got fired for buying IBM was a message of safety. And that message of safety sold despite all the pressures of price. So one of the things that salespeople have to do this time around is make their customers feel safe. They have to create trust. They have to work hard to come across to their customer base as a reliable, low-risk option. And yet, most people are very, very poor at doing that. This is one of the reasons why it's particularly dangerous to negotiate too soon in the sales process. If you do that, what happens is that you telegraph to the customer that you're nervous, you're concerned, you're prepared to give things away, you're anxious, and of course the customer perceives you as a higher risk. So those are just 3 things. Number 1, in hard times, focus on fewer opportunities. Number 2, in hard times, don't negotiate early in the sales process. And number 3, in hard times, remember customers are buying safety, and that's more important than price, except in the commodity sale. But in the consulted business-to-business sale, safety is paramount. And that's what salespeople must learn to do. It's why confidence is so important in that part of the sales process. So I hope this is useful advice. I hope to see you all again. Thank you for being with me, and good luck.